Early humans lived close to fire long before they understand all it can do. And in this first encounter between flame and flesh, the story of smoking begins. They cluster at cave mouths and wind-sheltered overhangs where sparks catch wood and damp brush, and meat from a successful hunt lies near the warmth. In such conditions, thin, cool smoke drifts over strips and joints, drying their surfaces while phenolic vapors slow the growth of microbes. Without intention, a preservative effect takes hold. Archaeological evidence shows that the habitual use of fire reaches deep into the Pleistocene at Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. Deposits of ash and charred bone around 1 million years old point to controlled burning within the cave, and at Gesher Beno Yaakov in the Levant hearths and heat-altered stone dated to roughly 780,000 years ago, indicate repeated fire use by hominins. This consensus record anchors the setting in which meat smoke and time begin to interact in ways that change how communities endure lean seasons. Meat spoils quickly when left in the heat. Bacteria and enzymes work fast on moist tissues. Smoke alters that timeline by depositing antimicrobial compounds and driving off surface moisture, and low, steady warmth tightens muscle fibers just enough to hold shape while water activity drops. None of this is described or theorized by the people who stand at those hearths. They practice attention, not chemistry, and they notice that meat kept near cool smoke remains edible longer and resists insects. A lesser-known detail from the sites that mark the deep history of fire hints at how varied these early experiments may have been. At Gesher Beno Yaakov, researchers document charred remains of fish and plants alongside burned flint micro-artifacts, suggesting repeated processing of aquatic and terrestrial foods at organized hearths in a lakeshore environment, an arrangement where hanging or setting racks above embers would have been both practical and visible. Such places teach by repetition. A carcass is skinned and sectioned. The fattier cuts cook quickly and are eaten, while leaner portions are hung on sticks or laid on greenwood frames close enough to be warmed far enough to avoid scorching. Across hours, smoke accumulates on the surface as a dry film, and the meat stiffens and darkens. Days later, it still smells stable. On long walks, pieces carried in slings or tucked into hides remain serviceable and safe. Whether this is intention or accident remains an open question that archaeologists cannot resolve. From deposits alone, did communities discover smoke preservation because a cave's airflow drew cool fumes across meat by chance, or because someone noticed the pattern and began to arrange wood, distance, and time on purpose? The unresolved mystery persists because hearths leave evidence of heat and ash, but not of deliberate temperature control or airflow management in the precise ranges that modern smoking employs. Yet even without deliberate design, the combination of low heat, dry air, and wood smoke acts reliably enough to invite imitation, and imitation becomes practice. The planetary backdrop matters. During the Pleistocene, climates swing between glacial and interglacial states. In drier phases, vegetation thins, winds strengthen, and dust and smoke travel farther over open ground. On savannas and steppe margins, the same breezes that fan embers and carry sparks also pull smoke away from flames and across food set at the edges of hearths, transforming a cooking place into a preservation zone. Cold seasons shorten the window for fresh meat and lengthen the benefits of anything that can be kept and smoked becomes a quiet ally. A subtle sense of scale plays out in the distances that preserved meat enables a group can range from the foothills where game is taken to wetlands, where tubers and reeds are gathered a route longer than from the Nile's middle reaches to the Levantine lakes without exhausting their stores. In this first section of the story, attention rests on small choices and repeated observations. Firewood is chosen not only for flame, but for smoke character. Damp wood yields heavier smoke. Resinous twigs flare too hot. Hardwood embers stay even. Racks are placed where the wind slides past the cave mouth or through a rock cleft, and meat is turned with a stick when droplets bead. At night, embers are banked under ash to keep a low heat alive until morning. In cave interiors like Wonderwerk, the depth at which ash lenses appear suggests fires maintained well away from the sunlit entrance, hinting at an appreciation for sheltered combustion that pairs naturally with unattended, slow smoking. The physiology of preservation is never named, but always felt. Food lasts, travel widens, risk narrows. Predators and insects are held at bay when smoke occludes blood scent and dries surfaces. Communities that keep a portion of each kill in a smoke zone bridge the gap between hunt and hunt with steadier energy. Across generations, this steadiness accumulates as cultural memory. Habits are taught by showing, hang here, not there. Use this wood in rain seasons. The practice spreads not as a dramatic innovation, but as a stable pattern that anyone can copy at a glance. Later periods will give names to structures and methods, smoke houses, cold smoke, hot smoke, but the template is present at the beginning. Embers for hours, smoke for days, distance as a dial. In this setting, the first act of preservation with smoke is less an invention than an alignment with the environment. Wood burns air, moves, flesh dries, and the line between cooking and keeping becomes a gradient that groups learn to inhabit. By the time fires are an unquestioned part of daily life, the knowledge that meat lasts longer in the path of smoke is equally unquestioned carried forward, because it works whenever conditions are arranged in the same quiet way. Begins in places where the wind turns smoke into shelter. Natural rock formations overhanging ledges and partially enclosed valleys create spaces where drifting fumes linger longer than in open air. In these landscapes, humans find that meat hung in the path of this slow-moving smoke not only dries, but resists the sour odors of decay. Archaeologists studying early hearth sites in limestone shelters, such as those in southern France and northern Spain, note the placement of fire remains in positions that would naturally funnel smoke toward ceiling and back walls, creating a partial chamber effect. Here, meat could be suspended or set on platforms just outside the main heat zone, where thin ribbons of smoke passed over for hours without scorching the flesh. This arrangement might have been discovered by coincidence when a carcass or hide was left to the side of a fire to avoid attracting flies, only to be found edible days later. The preservation power of such smoke lies not only in its chemistry but in the environmental context, cooler temperatures under rock-reduced wind speed, and a steady source of dry heat from embers. A lesser-known detail emerges from ethnographic parallels. In parts of Siberia and subarctic North America, hunter-gatherers have used smoke from small smoldering fires to protect dried fish and meat from insect infestation, as much as to preserve them from spoilage, suggesting that insect deterrence may have been one of the earliest perceived benefits of the practice. This hints at an evolutionary pathway for the technique that predates full awareness of its long-term storage value. The unresolved mystery in this stage of development concerns intentionality. Did early groups alter firewood choice or adjust fire placement specifically for preservation? Or was smoke simply a byproduct of cooking that happened to confer these benefits? Evidence of deliberately selected hardwoods or resinous species for particular smoke qualities appears much later in the archaeological record, leaving this early phase in a gray zone between opportunism and planned method. Planetary scale patterns also shape this behavior. In regions influenced by seasonal monsoons or extended wet seasons, food spoilage risk spikes with humidity. The same shelters that slow smoke dispersal also protect meat from rain and dew, extending drying times without rehydration. In arid periods, windier and dustier, the role of smoke may shift more toward flavor and protection from insects, while the drying effect alone suffices for preservation. Across different environments, the interplay between microclimate and smoke persistence governs how long meat can be kept, and groups adapt their use of these sheltered fires accordingly. The scale of movement expands in this period as well. With more predictable preservation, hunting parties can travel farther from their home ranges, carrying smoked portions to exchange with neighboring groups, or to sustain seasonal relocations. Distances equivalent to weeks of walking across plateaus, river valleys, or coastal headlands become feasible without the constant pressure to hunt daily. As this pattern repeats, smoke preservation moves from an incidental benefit to a learned skill, even if it lacks formal terminology. In every case, the practice is tied to place, a favored ledge, a bend in a canyon, a cave mouth, with the right draw of air. These locations hold memory and become part of the seasonal round, visited not just for shelter, but for the predictable effect of smoke. Over time, this convergence of geology, climate, and human observation lays the groundwork for smoking as a repeatable preservation method rather than a lucky accident. Turns to the lean times that make preservation essential. In many Pleistocene environments, food availability follows a sharply seasonal pattern abundance during certain months when game animals are fattened on summer forage scarcity, in the cold or dry season when herds migrate or plant foods vanish. Without reliable storage, communities must either follow prey over long distances or endure hunger when fresh meat runs out. In these cycles, smoke becomes a quiet safeguard. Archaeological studies of faunal remains from sites in Eastern Europe and Central Asia show butchery marks consistent with processing large game in bulk during short hunting seasons, suggesting that surplus meat needed to be preserved quickly. In open-air kill sites such as Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, the distribution of hearths and associated bone fragments points to repeated seasonal use of pattern, where smoking could have been one of several preservation strategies alongside drying and freezing. The lesser-known detail in this context is that preservation was not always about keeping food for months. Sometimes the goal was to extend edibility just enough to bridge a gap of days or weeks until the next reliable hunt. Smoke, with its antimicrobial compounds and insect-repelling qualities, could make this possible even in damp or temperate climates, where drying alone was unreliable. The unresolved mystery here is whether early humans coordinated large-scale smoking efforts specifically for storage, or whether it remained a household or small group practice. Large communal smoking pits, which are common in later indigenous North American and Pacific Island contexts, leave distinct archaeological signatures. But such features are rare in deep prehistory, making it unclear when this scaling up occurred. On a planetary scale, climatic instability magnifies the importance of preservation. During abrupt cooling events such as the Younger, driest plant productivity drops, herbivore ranges shrink, and hunting success becomes less predictable. Groups that have mastered even basic smoking techniques can buffer themselves against these swings, reducing the need for constant mobility and allowing more time in favored camps with good shelter and firewood supply. The scale reference here is survival across a winter, equivalent to the distance from one end of the Danube basin to the other, sustained not by daily hunts, but by caches of smoked meat hung from rafters or stashed in cold crevices. This period in the story underscores how preservation changes human movement. Hunters no longer have to consume or discard all of a large kill at once. Instead, they can transform part of it into a portable reserve. This, in turn, supports larger gatherings as more people can remain in one place for longer without depleting local game. Socially, such stability allows knowledge to spread. Methods for arranging racks, selecting wood, and managing fires become part of shared instruction passed to the next generation as part of seasonal routines. Over time, these practices accumulate subtle refinements, slightly raising racks to avoid scorching banking embers to produce steadier smoke, choosing denser woods for longer smolder. While the science remains unspoken, the results are felt in every bite taken weeks after a hunt, when meat still carries the deep, dry scent of smoke. By the close of this phase, preservation is no longer just a fortunate byproduct of cooking. It has become a deliberate hedge against the hunger that follows the feast, woven into the rhythm of survival. Focuses on the material evidence of how early humans began to standardize smoking practices through the use of simple racks and suspended frameworks. Archaeological traces from late Paleolithic and early Mesolithic sites in Europe and Asia reveal post holes, fire-reddened stones, and concentrations of ash that suggest designated cooking or drying areas distinct from main living spaces. In some river valley settlements, such as those along the Dnieper, and in parts of the upper Volga, charred plant remains intermixed with small animal bones, hint at fires kept at lower temperatures, likely maintained for extended periods. The arrangement of these features implies that meat, fish, and other perishables were sometimes positioned above or beside these slow-burning hearths, rather than directly over open flames. This change marks a shift from incidental smoke exposure to a controlled process. The lesser-known detail here is the possible use of green wood frames, which ethnographic parallels show can provide both support and a mild humidifying effect that prevents surface cracking during smoking. The green sapwood, resistant to catching fire, allows racks to be placed closer to embers without risk of ignition, and its gradual drying over time gives off a faint aromatic smoke of its own. The unresolved mystery is how much of this development was independent across different regions versus shared through cultural contact. Similar rack-like structures appear in archaeological contexts thousands of kilometers apart, raising questions about whether they were parallel inventions born of necessity or diffused through slow, long-distance interaction between groups. On a planetary scale, the introduction of these frameworks expands the possibilities of smoking into more varied climates. In damp maritime zones, raised racks keep meat away from ground moisture and allow airflow from multiple directions, while in arid plains they help protect from dust and scavengers. This adaptability makes the technique viable from the Baltic coast to Central Asian steppes, wherever there is wood to burn and food to preserve. The scale reference in this stage is not just geographic, but temporal. Food preserved on such racks could last long enough to carry hunters and gatherers through migrations that might span the equivalent of several modern national borders. Socially, the presence of dedicated smoking setups fosters communal labor. Maintaining the right amount of heat and smoke requires constant attention, and tasks can be divided among multiple people, tending the fire, turning the meat, adjusting the racks. These coordinated efforts reinforce group cohesion and create opportunities for the exchange of other knowledge while the work continues. Over repeated seasons, preferences emerge for certain woods, hardwoods, for long smolder fruit, woods for flavor, resinous conifers, avoided for their harshness. Unless insect deterrence is desired, the selection of wood becomes as important as the selection of the animal parts themselves, influencing both preservation success and taste. By the end of this phase, the image of meat hanging in aromatic smoke has shifted from an incidental scene to a regular feature of human camps, tied to planning, cooperation, and an understanding of how to bend natural forces to human needs. Smoking is no longer simply a reaction to circumstance. It is a chosen action executed with tools and structures whose sole purpose is to extend the life of food. Follows the transformation from an occasional preservation method into a deliberate and repeatable skill. By this stage, groups have learned that the distance between meat and embers, the type of wood used, and the length of exposure all influence results. Ethnographic studies of recent hunter-gatherer societies, such as the Hadza of Tanzania or the Nucha Noth of the Pacific Northwest, show that smoking can be fine-tuned for either quick drying with a hotter fire or slow preservation with cooler, denser smoke. Archaeological hints of similar intentionality appear in mid-Holocene sites, where hearths are smaller, more contained, and sometimes dug into shallow pits. Features that reduce heat loss and create steady smoke for hours. This suggests a growing awareness of fire as a controllable tool rather than a simple source of heat. The lesser-known detail here is that some prehistoric sites yield fragments of clay or stone slabs positioned in ways that could have served as heat boffles, redirecting smoke flow over meat while shielding it from direct flame. Such arrangements would have allowed greater flexibility in choosing smoking locations and could even have made portable smoking setups possible for mobile groups. The unresolved mystery is whether the refinement of smoking was driven more by necessity, such as living in regions with prolonged scarcity, or by preference for the taste and texture of smoked meat, which could have encouraged its use even when fresh meat was abundant. On a planetary scale, the growing mastery of smoking intersects with broader patterns of human adaptation. As people settle seasonally along coasts, river deltas, and lake shores, fish smoking joins meat smoking as a crucial skill. Fish highly perishable benefits greatly from low, steady smoke, and in some coastal regions it likely becomes the primary preserved protein source. The scale reference here is seasonal mobility. A group could remain in one place through an entire rainy season, drawing on smoke stores instead of abandoning camp to search for food elsewhere. Socially, the skill takes on a teaching dimension. Children learn to recognize the right color of smoke, the feel of meat when it is ready to store, the smell that signals success or failure. Around smoking fires, knowledge is passed in simple instructions: turn this way, add that wood, wait longer. These instructions travel when people travel, and with them the practice spreads. Smoking also begins to influence the rhythm of work. In a camp where smoking is underway, there is a constant low-level occupation, feeding the fire, rearranging the racks, checking progress. This steady maintenance can be fitted between other tasks, such as hide scraping tool repair or food gathering. Over time, such integration makes smoking not an isolated chore, but a woven part of daily life. The choice of wood becomes more codified. In forested regions, oak, alder, or beech may be favored. In savannas, acacia or mopane might be chosen. These preferences produce distinct flavors, and though taste is not the primary goal, it becomes a recognizable signature of place. Travelers might know where meat came from by its aroma alone, linking preservation to identity in subtle ways. By the end of this phase, smoking stands firmly as an intentional craft applied with planning and skill, responsive to environment and resources, and able to carry communities through long intervals between hunts. Turns to the ways smoking adapts to different climates and environments, allowing it to become a nearly universal preservation method. In cold, dry regions, such as parts of Ice Age Europe or high-altitude plateaus in Central Asia, low ambient temperatures already slow bacterial growth. So smoking serves mainly to keep meat safe from scavengers and insects, while adding extra insurance against spoilage. In humid tropical forests, where heat and moisture create perfect conditions for decay, smoking becomes essential, drying the meat more thoroughly and coating it with antimicrobial compounds that help it last, even in oppressive dampness. Archaeological parallels can be drawn from preserved wood and hearth features in both Arctic and equatorial sites, showing that the core principle, cool smoke over extended time, translates across vast environmental differences. The lesser-known detail is that in some environments, smoking was combined with partial sun-drying or pre-salting, using naturally occurring saline soils or evaporated brine from coastal flats, creating hybrid preservation systems that could extend storage life even further. The unresolved mystery is how early these combinations emerged and whether they were independent discoveries in multiple regions or knowledge carried along with migrating groups. On a planetary scale, the adaptability of smoking aligns with the spread of Homo sapiens into diverse habitats after leaving Africa. The same basic setup, a controlled fire, a means of suspending meat, and a way to shelter smoke, works in glacial valleys, rainforests, deserts, and island shores. The scale reference here lies in the migration range from equatorial Africa to the edges of Beringia. Smoking allows groups to keep meat edible over journeys spanning thousands of kilometers and months of seasonal change. Socially, adaptation to climate shapes the design of smoking structures. In windy steppe regions, low pit fires with partial coverings protect embers from being blown out, while in wetter zones, enclosed huts or thatched smokehouses keep rain from quenching the fire. These structures may begin as temporary expedients, but in time develop into recognizable forms used year after year. The choice of fuel also reflects environment. In boreal forests, spruce or birch may dominate. In coastal mangroves, denser tropical hardwoods are preferred for their slow burn and consistent smoke. This environmental tailoring gives each region's smoked meat a distinctive character, even when the underlying preservation goals are the same. As smoking integrates into varied climates, it also becomes tied to seasonal cycles. In colder zones, it is often concentrated in late summer and autumn, preserving food for winter. In tropical areas, it may occur after major hunts or fishing seasons, creating reserves for leaner months when weather or migration patterns limit fresh catch. These cycles anchor smoking as part of a broader subsistence strategy, reinforcing its role as both a survival tool and a cultural marker. By the close of this stage, the universality of smoking is evident. It is no longer a practice of certain groups or regions, but a widespread, adaptable technology that moves with people into every environment they inhabit, shaped by local conditions, yet always rooted in the same quiet principle food held in smoke endures. Examines how smoked meat transforms human mobility, enabling journeys that would have been impossible without reliable preserved food. Before smoking, hunters and foragers are bound tightly to the availability of fresh resources, their movements dictated by the rhythms of migration, ripening, and seasonal abundance. With smoked stores, they gain the freedom to cross areas with little to hunt or gather, carrying sustenance that can last for weeks. Archaeological hints of this shift appear in the distribution of non-local materials. Obsidian marine shells and ochre, found hundreds of kilometers from their sources in late Pleistocene sites. These artifacts imply extended travel and exchange networks, which in turn would have been supported by portable food supplies like smoked meat and fish. A lesser-known detail emerges from analysis of residue on ancient carrying containers. In some cases, traces of animal fat and soot appear together, suggesting that smoked meat may have been wrapped in hide or bark, lined with ash, a technique that would further protect it during transport. This practice, seen in later traditional societies, would have allowed meat to remain edible even in fluctuating temperatures or damp weather. The unresolved mystery is whether such preservation was planned in anticipation of specific journeys or simply used to extend the life of surplus food with mobility as a secondary benefit. On a planetary scale, the capacity to move with stored food expands human range dramatically. A group can cross deserts between oases, traverse high mountain passes before thaw, or travel along coastlines where storms disrupt fishing for weeks. The scale reference here is a migration equivalent to moving from the Mediterranean coast to the interior plains of Eurasia, without depending entirely on fresh kills along the way. Socially, the ability to travel farther on stored provisions fosters new forms of contact. Smoked meat becomes a trade item valued by groups who live in regions with fewer resources for hunting or fishing. Exchanges of preserved food for stone pigments or tool materials strengthen intergroup relationships, creating ties that reach far beyond immediate neighbors. This trade not only spreads material goods, but also the knowledge of preservation methods themselves, leading to wider adoption and refinement of smoking practices. The travel enabled by smoked stores also influences the seasonal patterns of life. Some groups may now choose longer hunting circuits, visiting distant grounds once a year rather than remaining close to home. Others can spend more time in places chosen for strategic reasons. Good visibility for hunting defensible positions or proximity to other groups rather than simply for daily food availability. Over time, these patterns contribute to broader human dispersal as each successful long-range movement opens the possibility of settling new areas. In every case, smoking acts as an invisible infrastructure for mobility shaping where people can go and how they can connect. By the end of this stage, the role of smoked meat is no longer confined to storage. It has become an enabling technology for exploration, trade, and cultural exchange, quietly expanding the human world. Explores how smoking evolves into a cultural signature with distinct styles, flavors, and techniques emerging in different regions. While the primary goal remains preservation, the choice of wood, the structure of the smoking area, and the duration of exposure begin to reflect local resources and traditions. In riverine and lake districts, alder or willow may dominate the smoke, lending a lighter aroma, while in forested highlands, oak or beech might be preferred for their deeper, longer-lasting smolder. In coastal zones, driftwood or certain sea-salted timbers can impart unique flavors intentionally, or not creating a taste that becomes associated with a particular place. Archaeological parallels for such regional distinctiveness appear in later prehistoric contexts, where charred wood fragments from hearths show consistent species used over centuries, implying deliberate selection rather than chance gathering. A lesser-known detail is that in some areas, smoking racks are partially enclosed with woven mats, bark panels, or stone walls, concentrating the smoke and protecting it from wind. This design choice, visible in both ethnographic records and the remains of post structures in ancient sites, suggests a move toward more controlled environments that could produce a consistent result year after year. The unresolved mystery is how much of this regional variation developed in isolation versus being influenced by contact with neighboring groups. While some similarities in rack construction or wood choice could be explained by environmental availability, others might point to shared knowledge carried along trade routes or through seasonal gatherings. On a planetary scale, the emergence of regional smoking traditions mirrors broader patterns of cultural diversification. As populations grow and spread into varied landscapes, the same core technique branches into multiple forms, each adapted to local conditions, yet still recognizable as part of the same technological family. The scale reference here is the cultural map that emerges a network of distinct smoking methods stretching across continents from tundra to tropics, each tied to a specific identity. Socially, these regional signatures can become markers of belonging. In gatherings where multiple groups meet, the aroma of a smoked cut might signal its origin as clearly as the style of a tool or the design of a garment. This recognition fosters pride and reinforces group identity, even as it allows for appreciation and exchange between cultures. Smoking also becomes woven into ceremonial or communal contexts. In some traditions, the act of smoking meat is linked to seasonal feasts or rituals, marking the end of a hunting period. The process itself, tending the fire, arranging the racks, waiting together, serves as a social anchor, providing time for storytelling, teaching, and negotiation. By the close of this stage, smoking has grown beyond a purely functional practice into a craft with cultural depth. It carries not only the memory of survival, but also the distinct imprint of place and people, a quiet yet enduring signature in the shared human experience of preservation. Turns to the puzzle of ancient smokehouses and other permanent structures built for preservation. While most early smoking likely took place in open-air setups or temporary shelters, some archaeological sites hint at more specialized constructions. In parts of northern Europe and Siberia, post-hole patterns and soil discolorations suggest small enclosed huts with central hearths and limited ventilation structures that could trap smoke effectively. In the Pacific Northwest, later, indigenous traditions used semi-subterranean pits with wooden coverings allowing low, steady heat and dense smoke to work for days. The lesser-known detail is that some of these structures show signs of repeated maintenance, repaired wall posts, replaced flooring, indicating they were valued enough to be kept over multiple seasons. This suggests a shift toward planned communal preservation spaces, rather than ad hoc arrangements near domestic fires. The unresolved mystery lies in dating the earliest of these permanent smokehouses. Organic materials like wood and thatch decay quickly, leaving only faint traces. So archaeologists debate whether such structures might have existed far earlier than surviving evidence shows. Some argue that the absence of direct remains in older sites reflects preservation bias rather than a true absence of the technology. On a planetary scale, the emergence of permanent smoking facilities parallels the broader trend toward semi-sedentary or fully sedentary living. Once people begin to return to the same seasonal sites year after year, investing labor in a fixed smoking structure makes sense. The scale reference here is the commitment of a community to one place long enough to justify building something that cannot easily be moved, a sign that preservation and settlement are reinforcing each other. Socially, permanent smokehouses change the dynamics of food processing. They allow larger quantities of meat or fish to be smoked at once, enabling storage for bigger groups or for trade. They also create specialized roles. Individuals skilled at managing the smokehouse become essential to the community, their knowledge contributing directly to survival. In some cultures, control over the smokehouse and its output could even become a form of status or influence. The permanence of these structures also makes smoking a visible, enduring part of the landscape. A smokehouse becomes a landmark, its darkened walls and lingering aroma signaling both practicality and continuity. When travelers approach a settlement and see a thin column of smoke rising from a familiar hut, they know preservation is underway. Food is being prepared for the weeks ahead, and the community has the means to endure. By the end of this stage, smoking has expanded from a flexible, mobile method to a fixed and deliberate part of infrastructure. It has become not just a way to make meat last, but a communal resource embedded in the physical and social architecture of human life, bridging the gap between foraging mobility and the stability of settlement. Closes the story by reflecting on the enduring link between smoking and human resilience, tracing how a chance interaction between fire and meat became a deliberate universal technology. Across the long arc of prehistory, what began as incidental exposure in a cave mouth evolved into a practiced skill adapted to nearly every climate, embedded in trade networks and woven into cultural identity. Archaeological, ethnographic, and climatological evidence converge on one point of consensus: smoking was never a single invention at a single place, but rather a repeating discovery made whenever humans and fire met in the presence of surplus meat. The lesser-known detail that deepens this picture is the survival of smoking traditions in small, isolated communities long after other preservation techniques, such as salting or refrigeration, became dominant elsewhere. These enclaves, whether in Arctic fishing camps or inland forest villages, preserve not only the method, but also the social rituals surrounding it, offering living parallels to practices that stretch back tens of thousands of years. The unresolved mystery that remains is how early humans first recognized smoking's preservative value. Was it a slow accumulation of observations reinforced by hunger, avoided, and waste reduced? Or was there a moment unrecorded and irretrievable, when someone deliberately hung meat in cool smoke for days, testing a theory? Without written records, the origin story is a tapestry of inference anchored in physical traces, but rich with unanswered questions. On a planetary scale, smoking stands as a quiet technological thread that links the first migrations out of Africa to the farthest reaches of human expansion. The same principles that protected meat in the Rift Valley helped sustain journeys across Siberia, the Pacific, and the Americas. The scale reference here is temporal rather than spatial. Tens of millennia of continuous practice, far longer than many other human technologies, have endured. Socially, smoking remains a communal act, even when reduced to a single hearth. It is a process that takes time and care, encouraging interaction and the passing on of skill. In prehistoric settings, tending a smoking rack meant hours of presence near the fire, an opportunity for teaching, story sharing, and decision-making. In modern contexts, echoes of these gatherings persist in shared meals and festivals centered on smoked foods. As an inheritance, smoking carries both practical and symbolic weight. It represents ingenuity, born from necessity, the capacity to notice and refine natural processes, and the ability to transform something fleeting into something enduring. The faint aroma of hardwood smoke drifting from a camp today is linked through unbroken human experience to the embers of ancient hearths. In that continuity lies the final significance of this practice. It is not just about making meat last, but about the human ability to endure by shaping the environment to meet essential needs. From survival in lean seasons to the shaping of trade travel and identity, the knowledge of how to preserve meat with smoke has accompanied humanity through ice and thaw, hunger and abundant settlement and migration. Its persistence is a testament to the adaptability and shared memory of our species, a skill passed across generations. Like an ember, kept alive through the night, ready to be coaxed into flame again whenever needed.